Mandla, I'm going to start with you. We've spoken already now about food security. How do you think it's best to partner with and within industry and for those that aren't in the industry to ensure food security?
Thank you, Janice, and good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So we've heard that we've got food security being a major problem statement in Africa and globally as well. We know that it cannot be done by any single stakeholder. It must be done in collaboration. You've mentioned a couple of the stats of where we are, and the biggest one to me is the population stat. We are currently on 8 billion people. About 20% of those are in Africa. In 2050, we expect to get to 10 billion, where 50% will be in Africa. That's an exponential increase in demand for food in the continent. And the main equalizer for that, we believe, is coming together as different stakeholders and collaborating. And the biggest factor that could make a difference is technology and bridging the gap. We have to invest further in farming technology, ensure that we can, hit above the belt and produce for a very high growing population. We are fortunate that we also have a very young population in the continent who are able to do this. And we believe that our role is to ensure that we impart skills, we impart knowledge, and ensure that this growing population can feed itself, not just the continent, but globally as well. So you have the public sector, you have the private sector, and once that collaboration works the way it should, we should be able to deal with all of these challenges. Over and above the population growth, we've talked on climate change, and we've touched on call it unnatural matters, such as geopolitical stability and all of that. We need to build a base that can sustain us through all of those challenges. And that happens by us ensuring that we come together as a collaborative unit and tackle this business head on. So I believe that we do have a challenge. Food security is an impending challenge and a crisis if we don't manage it, but we also have the tools to manage it. And that is collaboration, that is technology, and us ensuring that we empower everyone to be part of the solution.
Taking from what Mandla said, in this industry, it's a collaborative approach. And I feel like how best to combat the rising prices of fertilizers and fuel is really working together as partners to help industry, like your Agri SA, change policies around that, because typically farmers would say you need to be subsidized or would seek some sort of subsidies from government. Yes, as a farmer, you do get some rebates around your petrol and diesel consumption, right? But how do we mitigate or protect ourselves as farmers from high fertilizer costs? So I think an industry needs to come together, because if it impacts me directly on my farm from a fertilizer and a fuel perspective, it's definitely going to impact my retail client, which then impacts the consumers. And that's why I should find at any given time, maybe the pepper prices are 3 times more than what it was last month, milk, bread, etc. And remember that also in some processing and manufacturing companies, they require fuel to get their operations going. And so I think we definitely, once we feel these pinches in the industry must, I think fight back to say, let's regulate this, let's have it more controlled, and let it not get out of, spike really out of norm prices, because it will definitely impact the entire value chain. So to answer your question is that it definitely requires a collaborative approach. I cannot say from a farm on the ground, this is how you do it, because again, there's a supplier that takes my end product, and then there's a retailer that obviously needs my product, and there's a consumer that obviously procures and eats my products at the end of the day. Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's indeed a privilege to be the CEO of Agri SA. I never thought, I started off as a music teacher, and now I'm singing to the farmers out there. And trying to get harmony, to ensure that we, at the end of the day, build a resilient agriculture sector. But, and I'm going to try this in my best Afrikaans French. I think this chap called Meredith Le Soir He said the following: "It was the bumblebee and the butterfly who survived, not the dinosaur." And that's the big challenge that we have with most of our state-owned enterprises. It's dinosaurs. And because they don't have the ability to adapt and to follow trends, they are slowly, surely dying out. And because they do not have that ability to change, it impacts on all of us. What I've experienced in the agriculture sector, especially the commercial side of the agriculture sector, it's a very nimble, agile, also very resilient value chain. From the input side, that's where your Omnia sit, your John Deere's of the world, to the farmer. And the farmer obviously adapts all the time to ensure that they follow best practices, and in view of climate change and all the other factors, they are very creative. And then you've got your processors and your logistics networks, your retailers that must ensure that food that is being produced, processed, and packaged get to the consumer out there. So our big challenge, obviously, with Transnet is their inability to ensure that we transfer a lot of our produce to rail. Because in the past, we used to do that. Now we sit with so many trucks on the road that it actually becomes a massive problem. And there's a lot of delays also on that side. Yes, there are very good response from Transnet's side in that they want to privatize, and they've already started with privatization of certain routes, rail lines and so forth, but they don't go very far. I think there's a lot of impediments that they put, that are still not dealt with, because it's very difficult for private players to come in and take advantage of that opportunity. We've seen also very good announcement on the Durban port. There's also going to be privatization. The big question is, how soon can that happen? Because we are currently looking at other ports, for example, Mozambique. We are looking at other African countries, Namibia, for example, Walvis Bay, to rather utilize that. I was in conversation with the CEO of AXA to inquire about air freight, using aeroplanes to especially fly out perishable products such as berries, watermelon, and so forth. So those are the initiatives that we are taking. And yes, our big battle, obviously, to ensure, one, first and foremost, a conducive environment for food production to take place, and two, maximize profitability, because without ensuring that farmers remain profitable, it will become very difficult to continue to produce food. We've seen the impact, for example, of load shedding, the impact of logistics on the financial sustainability of many farmers. So much so that some farmers are already reducing the number of hectares they are planting, especially when it comes to vegetables and so forth. But that is not what we want to see happening. We want to see greater growth in the agriculture sector, and obviously with that growth becoming a much more inclusive sector, because that is one of our big political challenges that we face. But I'll come to that at a later stage. How do we ensure inclusive growth? Because it's not a farming problem. That problem sits right up there at Treasury level. But I'll deal with that at a later stage.
One of the things that we haven't spoken about when it comes to agriculture in particular is the elephant in the room, and that's subsidies at the global level. It is extremely challenging for South African a farmer, whether he's a small farmer, whether he's a large, with a massive balance sheet commercial farmer, to compete against Brazil, to compete against the US, to compete against Japan, to compete against China, to compete against the EU. Why? Because of massive state subsidies to the agricultural industries in those countries. And over and above that, the incredible non-tariff barriers that we face as exporters of agricultural products in South Africa, exporting to those markets. This week, in fact, this morning, we start the BRICS Summit here in Johannesburg. And we're going to talk about the biggest thing on the agenda is an expanded BRICS. However, within the 5 members of BRICS, we cannot access for our agricultural exports the massive market in China. We have access for a handful of products. The last one took 9 years to negotiate market access into the second largest economy in the world. India, the same problem, with massive non-tariff barriers that we face in order to get in there. So just to bring the conversation back, if we don't have deep pockets and the fiscal heft to subsidize our industry as well, what do we have left? What do we need to do? It's very clear that we need to focus on efficiency and effective production. What does that mean? That translates into creating an enabling environment for production of agricultural produce to happen in South Africa. That means making it as easy as possible to produce agricultural goods in South Africa. That means that the industry has to export. We already are large exporters within agriculture in South Africa. But for us to grow our competitiveness of agricultural produce or production and exports, we cannot have load shedding. We cannot expect a farmer to buy at massive capex his own electricity. We cannot expect him to truck his things down to the port. We cannot expect him, when it arrives at the port, to face an inefficient, tedious and expensive port process. If we solve those matters, which are not international matters, but which are domestic issues, we will have a significantly healthier and better thriving agricultural industry. So there's a lot more to talk about today, but we cannot ignore, the massive inequality of global subsidies in this industry. It is intimidating, to say the least.